Oh, that knife. Actually, I used that to stir her brains up a little, but then that didn't really work out.
And what did you do after that?
Then I had sex with her corpse.
You did? Did you come inside?
I did, actually.
Have you ever done that before, like that sex with her?
No.
The love between a mom and her child is special. Moms often feel a rush of love when they first see their baby and want to keep them safe. Protecting their kids is a natural feeling for moms and dads, but there are a lot of dangers out there. From bad people to scary situations, moms worry about everything. They also want to raise their kids to be good people, but even the best parents can't control their children's choices. We can only hope we raised them right and they'll make good decisions. Sadly, some people make bad choices even with a good upbringing. Sometimes these bad choices can even hurt the people who love them most, like a mom. Today, we'll talk about a difficult story involving an 18-year-old boy named Kevin Davis. Kimberly loved her son, Kevin, more than anything. Just like all moms, she must have felt incredible when he was born, but there's no way she could have known what would happen later. Kevin would one day hurt her very badly, in a way no mom should ever experience.
On a whim, actually, I turned it over, wrote a plan to kill both my mother and my sister.
Sadly, as we said, bad things can happen even to good people. Kevin's story is one of the worst. It's difficult to hear, so be warned. Let's jump to March 27, 2014, a normal day for a couple named Timothy and LaWanda in Robstown, Texas. They woke up, relaxed at home, and watched TV. Around 10 a.m., someone unexpectedly came to their door. LaWanda cautiously opened the door to find a young man who seemed ordinary. He wasn't scary looking at all, but then her world turned upside down. The young man blurted out, "I need you to call 911. I just murdered someone." Imagine someone at your door saying that. LaWanda knew they weren't in danger themselves, but the situation was terrifying. A murderer was on their doorstep. LaWanda called the police while her husband watched the young man. The young man even talked to the police on the phone. He said an officer would be there soon. As they waited in tense silence, the young man, whose name was Kevin, told them he had killed his mom and explained what he did. What scared LaWanda the most was how calm Kevin seemed. He was a little nervous, but overall polite and well-behaved. The police finally arrived, and the young man, Kevin, calmly surrendered. They took him to the station for questioning. The officers learned he was 18-year-old Kevin Davis, a high school student. No one could have guessed what they were about to find. Meanwhile, other officers went to Kevin's apartment in Corpus Christi. He lived there with his mom, 50-year-old Kimberly Hill. The officers didn't know much about their family yet. They entered apartment 1707, not knowing the horror that awaited them. As soon as they stepped inside, a terrible smell hit them, and they saw blood everywhere. Bloody marks dragged across the floor from the living room to a bedroom. In that bedroom, the officers found Kimberly's body on the floor. It was clear she had been beaten in the head with something heavy. There was blood everywhere, and a bloody hammer lay next to her. The scene was awful. Something else that shocked the officers was that Kimberly wasn't wearing pants or underwear. This crime scene was unlike anything they had seen before. Let's learn a little about Kimberly. She was 50 years old and known for being kind, caring, and hardworking. Surprisingly, she used to be a Marine. He served his country for 10 years before moving to Corpus Christi. There, she worked in hospice care, helping people facing the end of their lives. It was a tough job, but Kimberly loved helping others. Kimberly was a fantastic mom who loved her 2 children dearly. Her first child, a daughter named Desiree, was born when Kimberly was 26. Kimberly raised Desiree on her own for a while. Then, 6 years later, she had her son Kevin on December 27, 1995. Kevin's dad left the family soon after he was born and moved far away. Because of this, Kevin never had a close relationship with his father. In fact, Kevin even seemed angry with his dad, calling him names. Despite being a single mom, Kimberly did a great job raising her kids. She worked hard and always made sure they had everything they needed. Even Kevin, after what he did, admitted she was a wonderful mom. As Kevin grew older, he seemed different from other kids. He was shy and didn't make many friends. He preferred staying alone in his room, playing video games and watching violent movies. This worried Kimberly. She wanted Kevin to be happy and have a good life, with friends and activities he enjoyed. As Kevin entered high school, things got tougher. Like most teens, he argued with Kimberly about going to school. In October of 2013, Kimberly confided in her apartment manager about her concerns with Kevin. "We don't know exactly exactly what worried her, but hopefully things improved after that. Sadly, no one knew what was going on in Kevin's mind. On March 26, 2014, the day before he turned himself in, things seemed normal. A friend of Kimberly's who lived upstairs had her family over that night. Her daughter, Sierra, saw Kimberly outside her apartment around 9 p.m. Kimberly seemed happy and friendly, just like usual. Then Kimberly went inside her apartment, never to be seen alive again. Sierra, the friend's daughter, saw Kevin a little while after Kimberly. Kevin was usually a bit awkward, but this time something seemed really off. He stared at Sierra and her fiancé in a way that made them uncomfortable. After a few awkward moments, Kevin went inside his apartment. Sierra and her family stayed at her mom's place that night. She remembered hearing a thud at some point, but everything else seemed quiet. There was no way she could have known the horrible things happening in the apartment below. The next morning, alarm bells started ringing for Kimberly's co-workers. She was a reliable employee who never missed work without notice. Kathleen Flanagan, a colleague, found it strange that Kimberly wasn't at their morning meeting. They had even spoken the day before, and Kimberly seemed perfectly fine. Her boss, Celeste McCraw, initially figured Kimberly might have gone straight to a hospice patient's bedside, which wasn't uncommon. But with no sign of her and unanswered calls, worry began to set in. Kimberly's co-workers started calling her frantically. The unanswered calls were a bad sign. Kimberly's work family knew something was wrong. They contacted the police for a welfare check on 50-year-old Kimberly Hill. Celeste, deeply concerned, decided to take matters into her own hands and headed straight to Kimberly's apartment at Windrush Apartments. Pulling up to the complex, Celeste's heart sank. Police cars swarmed the place. It was never a good sign. While police were making the grim discovery at Kimberly's apartment, Kevin Davis sat in an interrogation room at the Corpus Christi Police Department. Footage from the room shows him alone in a blue chair, chin in hand, staring blankly ahead. There were no tears, no sadness, and no sign of any emotion at all. Detectives Romario Torres and Ariel Garcia entered, read him his rights, and Kevin signed the document, calm and nonchalant. In the video, he looked young, almost like a child, and even sounded childlike. There were even a few laughs shared when Kevin accidentally messed up the date. His relaxed demeanor completely contrasted with the seriousness of the situation. These detectives had dealt with murders before, but they had no idea of the darkness they were about to uncover from the seemingly ordinary young man before them. It was finally time to dive into the twisted mind of Kevin and the brutal murder he committed. Life had become meaningless to Kevin. He saw no point in living anymore. So in the late hours of March 26, 2014, the night before he murdered his own mother, Kevin penned a bone-chilling resignation notice. It was addressed to his mom, Kimberly, and his sister, starting off as a suicide note but quickly descending into something far darker. Kevin confessed, in his own words, "I've always fantasized about murdering and raping you two." It was a sickening admission that he had harbored fantasies of sexually assaulting and killing his own family since he was just a preteen. His mother, Kimberly, had always sensed her son was different. Kevin was known for making disturbing, off-putting comments, but she could have never imagined the depraved thoughts whirling in his mind all along. Earlier that day, after Kevin had expressed wanting to die, Kimberly had reached her breaking point. She insisted he go stay with his sister for a while to get some space. Little did she know, this seemingly harmless suggestion was the final trigger. After their interaction, Kevin retreated to his room and suddenly had that change of heart he described so chillingly in his note. Kevin's twisted change of heart that night took an unspeakably evil turn. The suicidal thoughts were gone, replaced by an overwhelming urge to act on the depraved fantasies he had admitted to in his note. He grabbed a cord and crept up on his unsuspecting mother, Kimberly, as she sat in the living room. In a sickening moment, Kevin threw the cord around her neck from behind and began violently strangling her. But strangling requires immense strength, and Kevin soon realized he couldn't cut off Kimberly's airway that way. A brief struggle ensued as his horrified mother started screaming, realizing with devastating clarity that her own son was trying to kill her. Undeterred, the diabolical Kevin ran to grab a hammer from her bedroom. Kevin soon returned to the living room, hammer raised high. With terrifying force, he brought it crashing down onto his mother's skull. The first blow dropped Kimberly, but she was still conscious, even trying to play dead. But her deranged son towered over her defenseless body and rained down blow after blow, the hammer repeatedly striking her skull in an animalistic rage. The blood sprayed across the room, covering Kevin, the walls, and even the ceiling. When Kimberly finally blacked out, barely clinging to life, Kevin finally stopped. But his unholy mission was not yet complete. He dragged his mother's battered body into the bedroom to continue the savage bludgeoning until her brain was exposed, and she took her final breaths while horrifically injured. By the time the stomping had stopped, Kimberly's skull had broken in half, revealing her brain. However, Kevin asserted that she was alive. He discovered this from her snoring, and he decided it was time to put an end to her. Unfortunately, he had changed his mind about using the hammer. Kevin decided to reach inside her skull and compress her brain between his fingers after seeing it exposed between the cracks. At first, when authorities questioned Kevin about the bloody knife they found at the scene, he denied ever carrying it.
And there was some blood in the knife, but you said you never used it? I guess just blood just from where you grabbed it or on the...
But after a few minutes, he remembered that he did use the knife to, quote, to stir her brain.
Oh, that knife. Actually, I used that to stir her brains up a little, but then that didn't really work out.
Kevin would subsequently describe his mother's brain tissue as feeling like putty to a psychiatrist by the name of Dr. Joel Kutnick. Additionally, he admitted that he removed his hands from his mother's skull and found brain stuff on his fingertips. He could have wiped it off, but instead, he decided to taste it. After being badly beaten and having her brain squished inside her skull, Kimberly Hill finally succumbed to her wounds. Regrettably, Kevin was not yet finished with her. He then made the decision to have intercourse with his mother's body after removing her garments. The concept that a son is naturally drawn to his mother is known as the Oedipus complex, but Kevin may not have fully grasped its meaning. This situation gave the impression that Freud was correct, despite the fact that the idea is controversial. Kevin's confessions revealed even more twisted depravities from his past. It turned out his necrophilic violation of his mother's body wasn't his first such act. Some time ago, he drowned the family cat, then cut open its corpse, and disgustingly engaged in acts of bestiality with it. After the atrocities against his mom, Kevin nonchalantly took a bath to wash away her blood. Recall from his haunting note that his sadistic fantasies extended to his sister Desiree as well. The 24-year-old lived nearby, but Kevin ultimately decided against pursuing her, for now. Instead, he penned more chilling letters to Desiree, ominously telling her, "Chase me," and flippantly apologizing for the mess. Kevin then planned to become a fugitive, seemingly getting an exciting thrill from his heinous crimes. He calmly biked around town for a while, the gravity of his acts not immediately sinking in, but eventually, reality hit. He was a wanted man with no money, car, or place to go. The person who once cared for him most had been brutally killed with his own hands. Finally, Kevin shockingly turned himself in by ringing the doorbell of a random home. His sickening confessions left Corpus Christi detectives completely perplexed when they arrived, and they were unable to understand what could have caused such unspeakable acts of matricide and defilement of a loved one's body. They even asked Kevin if violent video games planted such demonic ideas, desperate to rationalize the seemingly senseless violence. But while killing one's own mother is statistically quite rare, it's usually driven by typical motives, money and resentment from past abuse. But that wasn't the case here. By all accounts, Kimberly had been a caring, loving mother who did nothing to provoke such violence. Kevin himself admitted she didn't deserve her grisly fate. Kevin's fascination appeared to stem from a much darker, more disturbing fixation, an obsession with death itself and the macabre idea of violating the inside of a body, as evidenced by his earlier acts against the family cat. He fantasized exclusively about killing women. In a harrowing admission, Kevin even divulged to detectives what his ideal murder scenario would entail, his words chillingly echoing the fantasies of notorious serial killers. With each kill, they become more meticulous in their depraved methods. Had he not been stopped, detectives feared the worst, that Kevin would have been emboldened to kill again and again, taking his knack for sadistic violence to terrifying new heights, as he himself promised he would reoffend. Thankfully, that never came to pass. The police took Kevin away to face justice, as they broke the unimaginable news to his sister Desiree, that not only was their mother brutally murdered, but Kevin had even fantasized about subjecting her to the same fate next. At his eventual trial, Desiree would confront her fratricidal brother with harrowing words, "You took the only person who had your back. Now you're alone." The twisted details of the matricide at the Windrush apartments. As Kevin's interrogation concluded, the haunting question remained: what punishment could he possibly receive to fit his crimes? The detective simply asked him, point blank, "What do you think you deserve?" He then replied in a chillingly casual tone, "Whatever the judge, the people, or the jury deem fit." it. I can rot, I can suffer for years, or I can get the death penalty, whatever they think. And that's ultimately what transpired. 7 months after his sickening confessions, Kevin's trial began on October 6, 2014. Shockingly, he initially pleaded not guilty, despite the overwhelming evidence against him, including his own words. He eventually changed his plea to guilty, but even then, Kevin showed no remorse as disturbing details were presented to the jury. At times, he would snicker or even smile at them, a grotesque, sociopathic reaction to the horror he had inflicted on his own mother. The complete lack of empathy or regret on display only further proved to the court that Kevin was a dangerous sociopath who deserved the maximum punishment. Ultimately, he received the sentence befitting his heinous crimes: life in prison with no possibility of parole. This entire case was a shocking reminder of the depravities that can lurk beneath the surface, even from those closest to us. It left all who encountered the details shaken to their core, wondering how anyone could commit such unspeakable acts of violence against their own loved ones. This story needs to be heard. Subscribe and share this video to help raise awareness.